On a night with a cutting wind, a family arrives in an isolated village carrying a baby and a silent German shepherd. Between low walls and open windows, the dog leans against the crib, not allowing a single step out of reach. Outside, neighbors peek through the fences, whispering about the animal's size. Meanwhile, the German shepherd roams around doors and windows, sniffing cracks and growling into the dark. A gardener emerges from the shadows, hiding jewels behind closed curtains. The dog follows every trail, pushing the baby towards the hiding spot. Do you love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thank you for following us. Now back to our story. The moving truck disappeared around the corner of Maple Street, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the echo of its rumbling engine. Michael Thompson stood on the front porch of their new home, baby Emma cradled in his arms, while his wife Sarah directed the last of the movers with practiced efficiency. The house was everything they had dreamed of when they decided to leave the chaos of downtown Chicago behind a modest two-story colonial with white shutters, a wraparound porch, and a yard that seemed to stretch endlessly compared to their cramped city apartment. Millbrook, Ohio, population 3,147 according to the welcome sign, promised the kind of life they had always imagined for their growing family. Tree-lined streets where children could ride bicycles safely, neighbors who knew each other by name, and the kind of community spirit that seemed to have vanished from bigger cities. Sarah had fallen in love with the town during their first visit, enchanted by the farmers' market on Saturday mornings and the way strangers smiled and waved as they passed. "I think we're really going to be happy here," Sarah said, joining Michael on the porch and gently stroking Emma's soft blonde hair. The baby, only 6 months old, gurgled contentedly in her father's arms, seemingly unbothered by all the commotion of the day. "I hope so," Michael replied, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that he tried to hide. The decision to leave Chicago hadn't been easy. His architecture firm had finally agreed to let him work remotely, but it meant giving up the vibrant city life they had known for years, the restaurants, the museums, the energy that never seemed to fade. A sharp bark from inside the house reminded them both of another significant member of their family. Rex, their 3-year-old German shepherd, had been pacing anxiously through the empty rooms all morning, his powerful frame and alert ears making him seem larger than life in the unfamiliar space. Michael had rescued Rex from a shelter 2 years earlier, and the bond between them had been immediate and unbreakable. The dog's loyalty was absolute, his intelligence remarkable, and his protective instincts had been evident from the very beginning. "Poor Rex," Sarah murmured, watching through the front window as the dog appeared in the living room, his dark eyes scanning the street with the vigilance of a trained sentinel. This must be so confusing for him. As if summoned by their conversation, Rex appeared at the front door, his black and tan coat gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. He was undeniably impressive, standing 30 inches at the shoulder with the kind of presence that commanded attention. His ears stood erect, constantly moving to catch every sound, while his intelligent brown eyes missed nothing. Everything about him spoke of strength, alertness, and unwavering devotion to his family. Michael bent down to scratch behind Rex's ears, feeling the immediate comfort that always came from the dog's steady presence. "He'll adjust," he said, as much to convince himself as Sarah, "We all will." The first sign that their transition might not be as smooth as they had hoped came within the hour. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson from the house directly across the street appeared at her front door, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the heat of the day. She stood there for several minutes, making no attempt to hide her scrutiny of the new arrivals. When her gaze settled on Rex, her expression shifted from curiosity to something that looked distinctly like disapproval. "Should we go introduce ourselves?" Sarah suggested. Always one to believe in the power of a friendly first impression. Before Michael could answer, Mrs. Patterson retreated into her house, the screen door closing with a sharp snap that seemed to echo across the quiet street. It was the first of many such reactions they would encounter in the days to come. By evening, as they sat on their porch enjoying the peaceful sounds of their new neighborhood, they noticed other subtle signs of the reception awaiting them. Mrs. Jennifer Hayes from 2 houses down walked her small terrier past their property, crossing to the opposite sidewalk when she spotted Rex lying calmly beside the porch steps. The mailman, a friendly man named Tom, who had been serving the route for 15 years, paused noticeably when he saw Rex through the front window, taking extra care to secure the mailbox before hurrying back to his truck. "Maybe they're just not used to big dogs," Sarah offered, though her voice lacked conviction. In Chicago, Rex had been a familiar sight in their neighborhood, beloved by children and adults alike. The difference here was stark and unexpected. The next morning brought their first direct encounter with the local sentiment. Michael was in the front yard, attempting to assemble Emma's new swing set, while Rex supervised from the shade of the old oak tree. The baby was napping peacefully in her carrier nearby, the gentle breeze rustling through the leaves providing a natural lullaby. "Excuse me," a voice called from the sidewalk. Michael looked up to see a man in his 50s approaching, his expression serious and his hands clasped behind his back. This was Robert Kellerman, the unofficial spokesperson for the Neighborhood Watch, though Michael didn't know that yet. "I'm Bob Kellerman," the man said, extending his hand in a gesture that seemed more obligatory than welcoming. "Live in the blue house on the corner. Michael Thompson," Michael replied, wiping his hands on his jeans before accepting the handshake. "This is Rex and my daughter Emma." Bob's eyes moved to the dog, and Michael noticed the slight tension that crept into his shoulders. "That's quite a large animal you have there." "Rex is very well trained," Michael said quickly, sensing the direction of the conversation. "He's been through obedience classes, and he's wonderful with children." "I'm sure he is," Bob replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just that we have a lot of young families on this street, small children who might not understand how to behave around such a powerful animal." Michael felt his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Rex has been around my daughter since she was born. He's incredibly gentle and protective." "Of course," Bob said, taking a step back as Rex stood and moved closer to Michael's side. The dog's posture was relaxed, his tail wagging slightly, but Bob's reaction made it clear that he saw something threatening in the simple movement. "And I'm just saying that some folks might be concerned, you understand." After Bob departed, Michael found himself questioning their decision for the first time since they had signed the papers on the house. He looked down at Rex, who had settled back into his spot under the tree, his attention focused on baby Emma with the kind of devotion that had always amazed Michael. The dog seemed to understand that this small, vulnerable creature was precious beyond measure, and he had appointed himself as her guardian without being asked. That evening, as Sarah prepared dinner and Emma played on her blanket in the living room, Michael stood at the front window watching their new neighbors. He could see Mrs. Patterson talking animatedly with Mrs. Hayes over the fence that separated their backyards, their occasional glances toward his house making their topic of conversation obvious. Down the street, a group of children played in their yard under their parents' watchful eyes, but when Rex appeared in the front window, the parents quickly called their children inside. "Maybe we should give it time," Sarah said, joining him at the window with Emma in her arms. The baby reached toward Rex, who had positioned himself between the window and the front door, as if standing guard. "People need to get to know us, to see that Rex is part of our family." Michael nodded, but a seed of doubt had been planted. In the days to come, That seed would grow as whispered conversations followed them wherever they went, as parents pulled their children closer when they saw Rex on his leash, and as the warm welcome they had expected from their new community remained conspicuously absent. The challenge ahead would test not only their resolve, but also the very bonds that held their family together, revealing truths about loyalty, prejudice, and the courage required to stand by those we love when the world seems determined to judge them unfairly. The Millbrook Community Center buzzed with the familiar energy of the monthly Neighborhood Association meeting. Sarah had circled the date on their calendar weeks ago, seeing it as the perfect opportunity to introduce themselves properly and dispel any concerns about Rex. She had even baked her grandmother's famous chocolate chip cookies, the same recipe that had won over countless neighbors in Chicago. Michael carried the container of cookies while Sarah pushed Emma's stroller through the center's automatic doors. Rex waited at home, a decision they had made reluctantly but strategically. They wanted to discuss him without his imposing presence influencing the conversation. "You must be the new family on Maple Street," a warm voice called out as they entered the main hall. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail approached them with a genuine smile. "I'm Linda Morrison. My husband Frank and I live in the Yellow House on Pine Street." "Sarah Thompson," Sarah replied, immediately warmed by Linda's friendly demeanor. "This is my husband Michael and our daughter Emma." "She's absolutely precious," Linda cooed, bending down to get a better look at the baby. "How old is she?" 6 months next week, Sarah said proudly. "We're so excited to be part of the community here." "Well, you picked a wonderful place to raise a family," Linda assured them. "Frank always says Millbrook is the kind of town where everyone looks out for each other." As they chatted, other residents began to gather around them. There was Dr. Patricia Wells, the local veterinarian, who immediately inquired about their pets, and James Mitchell, who owned the hardware store on Main Street and seemed genuinely interested in Michael's work as an architect. For a few moments, Sarah allowed herself to believe that their concerns about acceptance had been premature. The shift in atmosphere became apparent when Mrs. Patterson entered the room, followed closely by Bob Kellerman and several other residents Sarah had seen, but not yet met. The friendly conversations around them gradually diminished as word spread about the new family's arrival. She noticed the way eyes darted toward them, the hushed conversations that stopped when they drew near. "Ladies and gentlemen," called out Mayor Richard Thornton, a portly man with a silver mustache who had been running the town for nearly 2 decades. "Let's begin tonight's meeting." The usual business preceded smoothly discussions about the upcoming Harvest Festival, plans for new streetlights on Oak Avenue, and proposals for the community garden expansion. Sarah found herself relaxing, appreciating the genuine care these people showed for their town. This was exactly the kind of community involvement they had hoped to find. Then Bob Kellerman raised his hand during the open forum portion of the meeting. "I'd like to address a concern about public safety," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "We have a new family in the neighborhood, and they own a very large dog, a German Shepherd." Sarah felt Michael tense beside her, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. Around the room, heads turned toward them with renewed interest. "Now, I'm not saying anything against the Thompson family," Bob continued, his tone carefully measured. "They seem like nice people, but we all know that certain breeds can be unpredictable, especially around children." Dr. Wells cleared her throat. "Bob, German Shepherds are actually known for their loyalty and trainability. They're often used as service dogs and in law enforcement precisely because of their stable temperaments." "That's true for trained police dogs," Mrs. Patterson interjected, her voice sharp with conviction. "But we don't know anything about this particular animal's history or training. What if it attacks a child? Who's responsible then? Has the dog shown any aggressive behavior? Mayor Thornton asked, looking directly at the Thompsons. None whatsoever, Michael replied firmly. Rex has been through professional obedience training. He's lived with our baby since she was born, and he's never shown anything but protective instincts toward her. But that's just it, said Margaret Foster, an elderly woman Sarah had seen tending her rose garden. You say protective, but what does that mean exactly? What if he decides to protect your child from other children during play? What if he misinterprets normal childhood roughhousing as a threat? Sarah could feel the room's energy shifting, the earlier warmth replaced by an undercurrent of suspicion and concern. Rex is incredibly gentle, she said, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. He's been socialized with people of all ages. In Chicago, children in our neighborhood loved playing with him. Chicago is very different from Millbrook, Mrs. Patterson observed. We're a small community where everyone knows everyone. We can't afford to take chances with our children's safety. Though, what exactly are you proposing? Dr. Wells asked, her professional demeanor masking what Sarah suspected was growing irritation with the conversation's direction. I think it would be reasonable to ask that the dog be kept on a leash at all times when outside, Bob suggested, and perhaps avoid the areas where children commonly play. Our yard is fenced, Michael pointed out. Rex is only off-leash on our own property. Still, Margaret added, it would be good to know that there are restrictions in place. Some of us are elderly and might not be able to get away quickly if the dog became aggressive. Linda Morrison, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. I think we might be getting ahead of ourselves here. The Thompsons have been nothing but neighborly since they arrived. Shouldn't we give them and their dog a chance to prove themselves before we start imposing restrictions? It's not about being neighborly, Mrs. Patterson replied. It's about being responsible. Once something happens, it's too late for precautions. Mayor Thornton raised his hands to quiet the growing murmur of conversations around the room. Let's not turn this into something bigger than it needs to be, he said diplomatically. The Thompsons are new to our community, and I'm sure they want to be good neighbors. Perhaps we can all agree to take things one day at a time and address any actual issues if and when they arise. The meeting moved on to other topics, but Sarah barely heard the remainder of the discussions. She felt the weight of sideways glances and knew that their introduction to Millbrook society hadn't gone as planned. As people began to file out, a few residents approached them with apologies and reassurances, but the damage had been done. Don't let them get to you, Linda said as she stopped by their table. Some people here have never lived anywhere else, and change makes them nervous. Give it time. Walking home under the streetlights of Maple Street, Sarah pushed Emma's stroller while Michael carried the untouched container of cookies. The evening air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the quiet streets that had seemed so peaceful now felt somehow watchful. Maybe we should consider getting a privacy fence, Michael suggested quietly. Something taller than what we have now. Why should we have to hide? Sarah asked, though she understood his reasoning. Rex hasn't done anything wrong. I know that, and you know that. But if it makes everyone more comfortable and gives Rex more freedom in our yard, maybe it's worth considering. As they turned into their driveway, Rex appeared at the front window, his silhouette backlit by the living room lamp. His tail wagged at the sight of their return, and Sarah could almost see the relief in his posture. He had been alone for 2 hours, probably wondering why his family had left without him. There's something else, Michael said, as they reached the front door. Did you notice how Frank Morrison wasn't at the meeting? Linda mentioned he's always talking about community, but he was nowhere to be seen. Sarah paused with her hand on the doorknob. You're right, that is odd. Maybe he had to work late. Inside, Rex greeted them with his usual enthusiasm, though Sarah noticed he seemed more subdued than normal. As Michael carried Emma upstairs, for her bedtime routine, Sarah sat on the living room floor with Rex, running her hands through his thick coat. "They don't understand you yet," she whispered to him, "but they will. We just have to give them time to see what we see." Rex rested his massive head on her lap, his brown eyes looking up at her with what seemed like understanding. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its nightly quiet, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their real challenges were just beginning. The conversation at the meeting had revealed deep-seated fears that wouldn't be easily overcome, and she wondered if their dream of small-town acceptance might remain forever out of reach. What she didn't know was that Rex's keen senses had already detected something. The humans around him remained completely unaware of signs that their new home held secrets far more dangerous than neighborhood gossip, and that his protective instincts would soon be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The first week of October brought with it the kind of autumn weather that postcards were made of. Maple leaves drifted lazily across the Thompsons' front yard, creating a tapestry of gold and crimson that Sarah photographed daily to send to their friends back in Chicago. Emma had discovered the joy of watching the leaves dance outside her window, her tiny hands pressed against the glass as she babbled excitedly at the colorful display. Despite the lingering tension from the community meeting, life in Millbrook had begun to find its rhythm. Michael had established a home office in the converted attic, where he worked on architectural projects, while keeping an ear open for Sarah and Emma downstairs. Sarah had discovered a wonderful pediatrician for Emma, and had even made tentative plans to join the local book club, encouraged by Dr. Wells's invitation. Rex, however, seemed increasingly restless. It started with small things that only someone who knew him well would notice: the way he positioned himself differently in rooms, always with a clear view of both the front and back doors, how he would pause during their evening walks, his ears rotating like satellite dishes, picking up signals that remained invisible to human perception. The barely audible whines he made in the middle of the night sound so soft that Sarah often wondered if she had imagined them. "He's probably still adjusting," Michael said one morning as they watched Rex pace the perimeter of their backyard, his nose low to the ground as if following an invisible trail. New house, new smells, new territory to map out. Sarah nodded, but something in Rex's behavior troubled her. In Chicago, he had been confident and relaxed in familiar spaces. Here, even after 2 weeks, he maintained a vigilance that seemed to go beyond normal territorial assessment. The first. A concrete sign that Rex's concerns might be justified came on a Tuesday evening. Michael was working late on a project deadline, and Sarah had just finished giving Emma her bath when Rex began to exhibit behavior she had never seen before. Instead of settling into his usual spot in the hallway between the kitchen and living room, he positioned himself directly in front of the back door, his body rigid with attention. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked, approaching him cautiously. Rex's ears were forward, his gaze fixed on something beyond the glass panel of the door. When Sarah looked out, she saw nothing but their backyard, illuminated by the motion sensor light that had activated moments earlier. Rex remained motionless for nearly 20 minutes, his breathing shallow and controlled. Every few minutes he would tilt his head slightly, as if trying to pinpoint the location of a sound that existed just beyond human hearing range. When he finally relaxed and moved away from the door, Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October evening air. The next morning, she found Michael examining the back door frame, running his fingers along the wood near the lock. "Find something?" she asked. Emma balanced on her hip as she joined him on the small back porch. "Maybe," Michael said, his voice thoughtful. "See these marks here? They look fresh." Sarah leaned closer and saw what appeared to be small scratches in the white paint around the doorknob. They were subtle, barely noticeable unless you were looking directly at them, but they definitely hadn't been there when they moved in. "Could they be from when the movers brought furniture through?" she suggested, though even as she said it, she remembered that all the large pieces had come through the front door. "Possibly," Michael agreed, but his expression remained troubled. "I think I'll check all the doors and windows tonight, make sure everything is secure." That evening, while Michael conducted his security inspection, Sarah found herself paying closer attention to Rex's behavior. The dog followed Michael from room to room, occasionally stopping to sniff at particular areas around doors and windows. When they reached the living room, Rex spent several minutes investigating the large window that faced their side yard, his nose working along the frame with intense concentration. "He's definitely picking up something we can't detect," Michael observed, watching Rex's systematic examination of their home's perimeter access points. "Should we be worried?" Sarah asked, though the question was rhetorical. The knot of anxiety in her stomach had been growing steadily since the previous evening. "I don't know," Michael admitted, "but I think we should trust Rex's instincts. He's never been wrong about potential threats before." Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Through the front window, they could see Linda Morrison standing on their porch, holding what appeared to be a covered dish. "Linda," Sarah said warmly as she opened the door. "What a nice surprise." "I hope I'm not interrupting dinner," Linda said, offering them the dish with a bright smile. "I made too much lasagna again, and Frank is trying to watch his cholesterol. I thought you might enjoy it." "That's incredibly thoughtful," Sarah replied, accepting the gift. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" "I'd love to, but I can't stay long," Linda said, stepping into the foyer. "Frank is expecting me back soon. We're planning our weekend trip to visit his sister in Columbus." As Linda chatted about their travel plans, Sarah noticed Rex's reaction to their visitor. Unlike his usual friendly demeanor with guests, he remained at a distance, observing Linda with what seemed like careful assessment rather than his typical welcoming enthusiasm. "That's quite a magnificent dog you have," Linda said, apparently noticing Rex's attention. "Frank has always been fascinated by German shepherds. He says they're incredibly intelligent." "Rex is definitely smart," Michael agreed. "Sometimes I think he understands everything we say." "Where did you find him?" Linda asked, her interest seeming genuine. "Animal rescue in Chicago," Michael explained. "He was about a year old when we adopted him. The shelter said he'd been abandoned, but whoever had him before did an excellent job with basic training." "How wonderful that you gave him a second chance," Linda said. "Frank always says that rescue animals are the most grateful. They seem to understand they've been saved." After Linda left, Sarah and Michael shared the lasagna for dinner while Emma played contentedly in her high chair. The food was delicious, and Linda's gesture of neighborly kindness helped ease some of the tension from recent days. But Rex refused to eat his dinner that evening, something that had never happened in the 3 years since his adoption. He stood beside his food bowl, occasionally sniffing at its contents, but showing no interest in his usual enthusiastic consumption of his meal. "Maybe he's coming down with something," Sarah suggested, concerned by this deviation from Rex's. "A normal routine, or maybe he's too stressed from all the changes," Michael offered, though he sounded uncertain. It was nearly midnight when Rex's behavior took another unusual turn. Instead of settling into his bed in their bedroom, he positioned himself in the hallway, facing the stairs that led to the main floor. Sarah woke to find him sitting perfectly still, his ears alert and his attention focused downward as if he were monitoring the entire house. She rose quietly and joined him in the hallway, placing her hand gently on his head. His fur was slightly raised along his neck and shoulders, a sign of tension she recognized from his younger days when thunderstorms would make him anxious. "What do you hear, Rex?" she whispered. As if in response to her question, Rex stood and moved silently toward the top of the stairs. Sarah followed, her bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. From their elevated position, they could see into the living room and kitchen below, both areas illuminated by the soft glow of the nightlights they had installed for Emma's late-night feedings. Everything appeared normal. The furniture was exactly where they had left it. The doors remained closed and locked, and no shadows moved across the moonlit windows. Yet Rex maintained his vigilant posture for another 15 minutes before finally returning to the bedroom, where he settled onto his bed with what seemed like reluctant resignation. Sarah lay awake for another hour, listening to the normal sounds of their settling house and wondering if Rex's heightened alertness was justified or simply the result of adjustment stress. She wanted to believe it was the latter, but a growing part of her suspected that Rex's superior senses were detecting something that remained hidden from human awareness. Outside, the October wind stirred the fallen leaves into small whirlwinds that danced across the quiet streets of Millbrook, while somewhere in the darkness, patient eyes watched and planned, waiting for the right moment to turn the Thompson family's dream of small-town safety into something far more complicated and dangerous than they could possibly imagine. The October morning started like any other, with Emma's cheerful babbling serving as the family's natural alarm clock. Sarah had developed a routine of checking on her daughter first thing each morning, finding joy in the baby's excited reaction to seeing her mother's face appear above the crib. Emma would kick her legs enthusiastically and reach upward with tiny hands, as if she had been waiting all night for this moment of reunion. Rex, as always, had positioned himself near the nursery door throughout the night. Sarah had grown accustomed to finding him there each morning, a silent guardian who seemed to understand that his most important responsibility was protecting the smallest member of their family. "Good morning, beautiful girl," Sarah cooed to Emma while Rex stretched and yawned, his internal clock as reliable as any timepiece. "Did you sleep well?" The morning routine proceeded smoothly, Michael preparing coffee while Sarah changed Emma's diaper, Rex following his established patrol of the house's perimeter. Everything felt normal and peaceful until Sarah went to retrieve her grandmother's pearl necklace from the antique jewelry box in their bedroom. The necklace was supposed to be there. It had been there 3 days earlier when she had last opened the small wooden box to choose earrings for the community meeting. The pearls had been a wedding gift from her grandmother, passed down through 3 generations of women in her family. They weren't tremendously valuable in monetary terms, but their sentimental worth was immeasurable. "Michael," she called, her voice tight with confusion and growing alarm. "Can you come here for a minute?" He appeared in the doorway, coffee, mug in hand, his hair still messy from sleep. "What's wrong?" "My grandmother's necklace is missing," Sarah said, holding up the jewelry box so he could see its contents. "The pearl necklace that was my great-grandmother's, it's not here." Michael set down his coffee and joined her beside the dresser, examining the box's contents as if the necklace might somehow be hiding beneath. "The other pieces. Are you sure you put it back after the meeting?" "I'm positive," Sarah insisted, though she immediately began second-guessing herself. "I remember placing it right here, in the blue velvet compartment where I always keep it." They spent the next 20 minutes searching their bedroom thoroughly, checking under the bed, in the laundry hamper, and even in Emma's room, in case Sarah had somehow carried it there by mistake. Rex followed their increasingly frantic search. With obvious concern, his ears alert and his expression attentive, as if he were trying to understand the source of their distress. Could Emma have gotten hold of it somehow? Michael suggested. Though even as he said it, they both knew it was impossible. The jewelry box was kept on a high dresser, well beyond the reach of a 6-month-old baby. "She can barely sit up by herself," Sarah replied, her voice strained with worry. "There's no way she could have reached it." The search expanded to the entire house. They looked in every room, checked inside couch cushions, and even examined the washing machine and dryer in case the necklace had somehow become tangled. In bedding or clothing. After 2 hours of methodical searching, they were forced to accept that the necklace was simply gone. "We need to call the police," Michael said finally, sinking into their kitchen chair with defeat evident in his posture. "And tell them what?" Sarah asked. "That a piece of jewelry disappeared from inside our locked house. They'll think we're crazy. Maybe we should start by talking to the neighbors," Michael suggested. "See if anyone noticed anything unusual." Their first stop was Mrs. Patterson's house across the street. The elderly woman listened to their story with an expression that shifted from sympathetic concern to something that looked suspiciously like accusation. "How terrible for you," she said, though her tone lacked genuine warmth. "Have you considered that perhaps your dog might have taken it?" "Rex?" Sarah asked, incredulous. "Dogs don't steal jewelry, Mrs. Patterson." "Large dogs can be very destructive," Mrs. Patterson continued, clearly warming to her theory. "They'll chew on anything that catches their interest. Perhaps he buried it somewhere in your yard." Michael felt his jaw clench with frustration. "Rex has never shown any destructive behavior. He's never even chewed on our shoes or furniture." "Still," Mrs. Patterson said with the authority of someone who believed her opinions were facts, "it might be worth checking your yard. German shepherds are known to bury things. It's their natural instinct." The conversation with Bob Kellerman went similarly, though he was more direct in his implications. "Dogs that size have powerful jaws," he stated matter-of-factly. "They can destroy evidence pretty quickly. If he swallowed it, you might never find any trace." "Rex has never eaten anything he shouldn't," Sarah protested, feeling increasingly frustrated by these baseless accusations. "He's incredibly well-behaved." "When did you last see the necklace?" Bob asked, his tone taking on an investigative quality that made Sarah uncomfortable. "3 days ago," she replied. "I wore it to the community meeting, and since then, the dog has had access to your bedroom." "Of course he has," Michael interjected. "Rex isn't confined to certain areas of our house. He's a member of our family." Bob's expression suggested that this was precisely the problem. "Well, you might want to keep a closer eye on him. Animals can develop unusual behaviors when they're stressed by changes in their environment." By afternoon, word of the missing necklace had spread through the neighborhood with the efficiency of a well-oiled gossip network. When Sarah took Emma for a walk in her stroller, she noticed the way conversation stopped when she approached. The way neighbors who had previously offered polite nods now studied her with expressions of pity mixed with suspicion. Dr. Wells was the first person to offer a different perspective when she encountered them outside the hardware store on Main Street. "I heard about your necklace," she said with genuine sympathy. "That must be so upsetting, especially since it was a family heirloom." "Thank you," Sarah replied, grateful to finally speak with someone who didn't immediately blame Rex. "We're still hoping it will turn up." "Have you considered that someone might have entered your house?" Dr. Wells suggested quietly. "I know it sounds unlikely in Millbrook, but we're not immune to petty theft, especially if someone knew you, were new in town and might have valuables." The idea hadn't seriously occurred to either Sarah or Michael, primarily because there had been no signs of forced entry. But as they walked home, pushing Emma's stroller down the tree-lined streets of their neighborhood, the possibility began to seem less far-fetched. "The scratches on the back door," Michael said suddenly. "What if they weren't from the movers?" "But how would someone get past Rex?" Sarah asked. "He would have barked if a stranger had entered the house." "Not necessarily," Michael replied, his mind racing through possibilities. What if it was someone he had met before, someone he didn't perceive as a threat? That evening, they decided to install additional security measures. Michael purchased new deadbolts for all the exterior doors and a simple security system with door and window sensors. As he worked on the installations, Rex supervised with unusual intensity, paying particular attention to the back door where they had discovered the mysterious scratches. "It's almost like he knows something we don't," Sarah observed, watching. Rex examined each new sensor as Michael mounted them. "Maybe he does," Michael replied, testing the magnetic contact on the kitchen window. "Dogs have senses we can't even imagine. If someone has been in our house, Rex would definitely know about it." As night fell, they felt more secure with their new precautions, but the mystery of the missing necklace remained unsolved. Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about her grandmother's disappointed face if she could know that 3 generations of family history had simply vanished. Rex settled into his usual spot near Emma's nursery, but Sarah noticed that his breathing seemed different somehow, more controlled and deliberate, as if he were deliberately staying alert while the rest of the family slept. Outside, the October wind rattled the new security sensors, but inside the house, an almost palpable tension had settled over the Thompson family. What they didn't know was that Rex's instincts were absolutely correct. Someone had indeed been watching their routines, learning their schedules, and planning carefully orchestrated intrusions that left no obvious traces. The missing necklace was just the beginning of a campaign designed to create exactly the kind of suspicion and discord that was now threatening to tear apart their hopes of finding acceptance in their new community. The pressure from the neighborhood had become almost unbearable. It had been a week since the necklace disappeared, and despite their new security measures, the whispered accusations continued to follow the Thompson family wherever they went. Sarah found herself avoiding eye contact during grocery trips, while Michael had started working longer hours in his attic office, partly to escape the judgmental stares of their neighbors. The breaking point came when Mrs. Patterson organized what she euphemistically called a safety meeting in her living room. Sarah watched from their front window as neighbors gathered across the street, their serious expressions and frequent glances toward the Thompson house making their topic of discussion obvious. "Maybe we should just move back to Chicago," Sarah said quietly, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms, despite the tension that seemed to permeate their home. "We can't let them drive us away," Michael replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "We've done nothing wrong." Rex, who had been lying at Sarah's feet, suddenly lifted his head and moved toward the front door. His posture had shifted into the alert stance they had come to recognize, his ears forward and his body rigid with attention. "What is it, Rex?" Sarah asked, but the dog was already moving toward the back of the house with purposeful determination. They followed him through the kitchen to the back door, where Rex began exhibiting the same intense focus he had shown several nights earlier. This time, however, his behavior was different. Instead of simply staring at the door, he began whining softly and pawing at the floor near the threshold. "He wants to go out," Michael observed, reaching for the door handle. "Wait," Sarah said, something in Rex's demeanor making her cautious. "Look at how he's acting. This isn't his normal 'I need to go outside' behavior." Rex's attention was fixed on a specific area near the corner of the back door frame, close to where they had discovered the scratches the week before. He kept returning to that spot, sniffing intensely, and then looking up at them as if trying to communicate something urgent. "It's like he's trying to tell us something," Sarah said, studying Rex's behavior with growing fascination. Michael knelt down beside Rex and examined the area that had captured the dog's attention. The scratches they had noticed before were still there, but now that he looked more carefully, he could see that they formed a pattern suggesting someone had been working on the lock mechanism. "Someone definitely tried to get in here," Michael said with certainty. "These marks are too precise to be accidental." Rex moved away from the door and began sniffing along the baseboards of the kitchen, his nose working methodically as he traced an invisible trail. His path led him to the pantry, where he stopped and began pawing at the floor again. What could he possibly smell in there? Sarah wondered aloud. Michael opened the pantry door and examined the shelves, but everything appeared normal. Canned goods, boxes of cereal, and cleaning supplies were all exactly where they should be. Rex, however, wasn't interested in the shelves. His attention was focused on the floor at the back of the pantry, behind the cases of bottled water they had stored there. "Help me move these," Michael said, beginning to shift the water bottles. Behind the cases, they discovered something that made Sarah gasp. A loose baseboard panel had been carefully pried away from the wall, creating a small opening that led to the space beneath the kitchen floorboards. Inside this makeshift hiding place, barely visible in the dim light, was a small collection of items that clearly didn't belong to them. Michael used his phone's flashlight to illuminate the hiding spot and immediately saw Sarah's grandmother's pearl necklace, coiled neatly beside several other pieces of jewelry he didn't recognize. There were also candy bar wrappers, an empty water bottle, and what appeared to be a small notebook. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of relief and horror. "Someone has been coming into our house." Michael carefully retrieved the items from the hiding place, his hands trembling slightly as the full implications of their discovery became clear. The notebook contained handwritten observations about their daily routines, including detailed notes about when they left the house, how long they were typically gone, and even information about Emma's napping schedule. "Listen to this," Michael said, reading from the notebook. "Tuesday, M leaves for grocery store 2 p.m., back by 3:30. S takes baby for walk 4 p.m. daily. Dog sleeps in hallway at night, moves to kitchen around 5 a.m. Sarah felt physically sick as she realized how thoroughly their lives had been monitored. How long has this been going on? The notebook's entries dated back to their second week in Millbrook, suggesting that their unknown intruder had been observing and entering their home for nearly a month. The level of detail was disturbing evidence of someone who had been watching them with clinical precision. Rex had remained beside them throughout their discovery, his tail wagging now that his humans had finally understood what he had been trying to communicate. Sarah knelt down and hugged him tightly, feeling guilty for not trusting his instincts sooner. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered to him. "You've been trying to tell us someone was coming in here." "We need to call the police immediately," Michael said, photographing the evidence with his phone before carefully placing everything in a clean kitchen towel. Detective Amanda Torres arrived within 30 minutes, her professional demeanor immediately putting both Sarah and Michael at ease. She listened to their story without interruption, taking detailed notes and photographing the hiding place and its contents. "This is definitely breaking and entering," she confirmed, examining the scratched doorframe with a magnifying glass. "Whoever did this is very skilled. These lockpick marks are barely visible, and they knew exactly where to hide the evidence." But who would do something like this? Sarah asked. We barely know anyone in town. Actually, based on what you've told me and the level of detail, in these observations, I'd say you're looking for someone who has legitimate access to your neighborhood, Detective Torres explained. Someone who can move around freely without attracting attention. Like who? Michael asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Service workers are the most common perpetrators in cases like this. Mail carriers, utility workers, landscapers, housekeepers, people who have reasons to be in residential areas and whose presence doesn't raise suspicions. As Detective Torres continued her investigation, Rex remained close to the family, occasionally returning to the pantry to check that the hiding place remained empty. His relief was obvious, as if a weight he had been carrying for weeks had finally been lifted. Your dog is what broke this case, Detective Torres told them as she prepared to leave. Without his persistence in showing you that something was wrong, you might never have discovered the evidence. Meanwhile, the whole neighborhood has been blaming him for my missing necklace, Sarah said bitterly. Unfortunately, that's not uncommon, the detective replied. People prefer to blame what's unfamiliar rather than consider that the threat might be coming from someone they trust. That evening, as word of the break-in investigation spread through Millbrook, the Thompson family experienced their first taste of genuine community support. Dr. Wells stopped by with dinner, followed by Linda Morrison, who seemed genuinely shocked to learn about the intrusion. I can't believe someone has been coming into your house, Linda said, shaking her head in dismay. Frank is going to be so upset when he hears about this. He always says Millbrook is supposed to be the kind of place where people don't have to lock their doors. Speaking of Frank, Detective Torres said, appearing in the kitchen doorway, I'd like to speak with all of your neighbors who have regular access to the area. Would he be available for a brief interview? He's actually out of town until tomorrow, Linda replied. He went to Columbus to visit his sister, but I can have him call you as soon as he gets back. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. The evidence of Rex's innocence was undeniable, and surely now their neighbors would have to acknowledge that their suspicions had been unfounded. But what they didn't yet realize was that the most dramatic revelation was still to come, and that the person responsible for violating their home and terrorizing their family was much closer than any of them suspected. Rex's protective instincts, which had been dismissed and disparaged by so many, were about to be tested in ways that would prove once and for all just how far his devotion to the Thompson family would extend. The following morning brought a mixture of vindication and unease to the Thompson household. News of the break-in had spread through Millbrook with remarkable speed, and by 9 o'clock their doorbell had rung 4 times. First came Dr. Wells with homemade muffins and a heartfelt apology for the neighborhood's treatment of Rex. Then, Mrs. Hayes arrived with her terrier in tow, sheepishly admitting that she had been wrong to judge their dog so harshly. I feel terrible about the things people have been saying, she confessed, glancing down at Rex, who sat politely beside Sarah. Despite having every reason to hold a grudge, he's obviously a wonderful protector for your family. Even Bob Kellerman made an appearance, though his apology was more grudging than heartfelt. I still think you should be careful with such a large dog around the baby, he said, unwilling to completely abandon his position. But I'll admit he seems to have good instincts about security. Sarah found these attempts at reconciliation both gratifying and frustrating. Rex had endured weeks of suspicion and hostility, and now that his innocence was proven, people expected to simply move forward as if nothing had happened. Michael was in his office working when Detective Torres called with an update on the investigation. "We've been analyzing the jewelry found in your pantry," she said. "3 of the pieces were reported stolen from houses in neighboring towns over the past 2 months. We're dealing with someone who's been active in this area for a while." "Any leads on who it might be?" Michael asked, glancing down at Rex, who had settled beside his desk chair, as if understanding that this conversation was important. "We're focusing on people who would have had opportunities to observe your house and learn your routines," Detective Torres explained. "I'll need to interview everyone who's had access to your property since you moved in. That includes delivery drivers, service workers, and anyone else who might have been inside your home." "Linda Morrison mentioned that her husband Frank should be back from Columbus today," Michael offered. "They live just a few streets over." "Perfect. I'll contact them this afternoon." After ending the call, Michael found himself thinking about Frank Morrison. It struck him as odd that in nearly a month of living in Millbrook, he had never actually met the man, despite his wife's frequent mentions of him. Linda spoke about Frank constantly, referencing his opinions and preferences, but he always seemed to be elsewhere when she stopped by their house. That afternoon, Sarah decided to take Emma for a walk to the local park, both to enjoy the crisp October weather and to demonstrate to the neighborhood that Rex was indeed the gentle, well-behaved companion they had always claimed. Rex walked beside the stroller with his usual calm dignity, his presence drawing approving nods from people who had crossed the street to avoid him just days earlier. They were returning home when Sarah noticed an unfamiliar pickup truck parked in the Morrison driveway. Through the kitchen window of the yellow house, she could see 2 figures engaged in what appeared to be an animated conversation. "Frank must be back from his trip," she said to Rex, who had stopped walking and was staring at the Morrison house with the intense focus she now recognized as his warning signal. Rex's ears were forward, his body tense, and a low rumble emanated from his chest, a sound so quiet that Sarah almost missed it. Following his gaze, she saw a man emerge from the Morrison house and walk toward the pickup truck. Even from a distance, she could see that he was tall and lean, with graying hair and the kind of weathered appearance that suggested someone who worked outdoors. What alarmed her was Rex's reaction to this perfectly ordinary scene. The dog had gone completely rigid, his attention locked on the man beside the truck. When the man looked in their direction, Rex actually took a step forward, placing himself between Sarah's stroller and the Morrison property. "Rex, what's wrong?" Sarah asked quietly, trusting his instincts enough to feel genuinely concerned. The man raised his hand in what appeared to be a friendly wave, but Rex's growl became more audible. Sarah waved back politely, while simultaneously quickening her pace toward home, Rex moving in perfect synchronization with her to maintain his protective position. Once they were safely inside, Sarah called Michael to tell him about the encounter. "Rex has never reacted that way to anyone," she said, still unsettled by the intensity of the dog's response. It was like he recognized something threatening about that man. "Did you get a good look at him?" Michael asked. "Not really. Average height, graying hair, probably in his 50s. He waved, seemed friendly enough, but Rex clearly didn't like something about him." "Frank Morrison fits that description," Michael said thoughtfully. "Linda mentioned he works in landscaping, which would explain the weathered appearance. Should we call Detective Torres?" "Let's wait until after she interviews him. Rex might just be on high alert because of everything that's been happening." But Rex's behavior suggested something far more specific than general anxiety. For the rest of the afternoon, he positioned himself at windows that provided views of the Morrison house, maintaining a vigilance that reminded Sarah of his behavior during the first weeks after their move. Detective Torres arrived at the Morrison house at 4 o'clock, and Sarah found herself watching from her living room window as the interview took place on the front porch. Even from a distance, she could see that Frank Morrison was gesturing animatedly, his body language suggesting someone who was either very nervous or very angry. The interview lasted nearly an hour, and when Detective Torres finally left, Sarah noticed that Frank immediately went to his truck and began removing tools and equipment. Within minutes, Linda emerged from the house carrying suitcases, and the couple appeared to be loading the vehicle as if preparing for a hasty departure. Rex had been watching this activity with the same intense focus, occasionally whining softly and moving restlessly from window to window. When Sarah's phone rang, she was surprised to hear Detective Torres on the line. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you and your family to be extra cautious tonight," the detective said without preamble. "Can you make sure all your doors and windows are securely locked?" "Why? What did you find out?" Frank Morrison's story about visiting his sister in Columbus doesn't check out. I called his alleged destination, and no one there has seen him in months. He also became very agitated when I asked about his whereabouts during the times when your house was entered. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "You think he's the one who's been breaking in?" "I think it's a strong possibility. We're working on getting a search warrant for his property, but these things take time. In the meantime, I want you to be very careful. Should we leave the house?" "That's not necessary, but keep your security system armed and don't open the door for anyone you don't know well. Your dog's protective instincts seem to be excellent, so trust them." After ending the call, Sarah immediately shared the conversation with Michael. They spent the evening double-checking their security measures and discussing whether they should take Emma and stay in a hotel for the night. "Detective Torres said we'd be safe if we're careful," Michael reasoned. "And honestly, with Rex on, God, I feel more secure here than anywhere else." As if he understood that his family was depending on him, Rex took up his protective position near the front door, his senses alert to every sound and movement outside. The Thompson family settled into an uneasy evening routine, with Michael working in his office and Sarah reading in the living room while Emma played on her blanket. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Rex's behavior changed dramatically. The low growl that had become familiar over recent weeks began again, but this time it was accompanied by the kind of focused intensity that suggested immediate danger. Rex moved to the back door, his entire body tense with anticipation. Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see a figure moving carefully across their backyard, staying in the shadows cast by the large oak tree. The person was dressed in dark clothing and appeared to be approaching the house with deliberate stealth. "Michael," she called urgently, "someone's in our backyard." As Michael rushed downstairs, Rex's growls became more insistent. The dog positioned himself directly in front of the back door, his powerful frame ready to defend his family against whatever threat was approaching from the darkness outside. The moment of truth that would test every assumption about loyalty, trust, and the bonds that hold families together was finally at hand. Michael grabbed his phone and dialed Detective Torres, while Sarah scooped Emma close to her chest. Rex remained. At the back door, his growls a continuous rumble of warning. "There's someone in our backyard right now," Michael whispered urgently. "Rex is going crazy, and we can see a figure moving toward the house." "Stay where you are," Detective Torres commanded. "We have units in the area. Don't confront this person directly." Through the kitchen window, they watched the shadowy figure reach the back door and begin working on the lock with practiced efficiency. Rex's entire body was coiled like a spring, ready to defend his territory. The back door opened silently. Frank Morrison stepped into the kitchen, moving with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Rex erupted into motion. The confrontation lasted only seconds. Rex launched himself forward with a bark that shook the windows. His powerful presence aimed to subdue rather than harm. Frank stumbled backward, dropping his bag of tools in panic. "Get away from me!" Frank shouted, his voice carrying pure terror. Rex positioned himself between Frank and the rest of the house, his controlled barks designed to alert and intimidate. His restraint was remarkable. He could have seriously injured the intruder, but chose protection over aggression. "Police! Nobody move!" Detective Torres's voice cut through the chaos as she and two officers burst through the front door. Frank Morrison froze, hands raised, caught in the act. On the kitchen floor lay his lockpicks and notebook. Rex maintained his guard until Detective Torres gave the command to stand down. "Frank Morrison, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, theft and stalking," she announced, handcuffing the man who had terrorized their family for weeks. Linda Morrison appeared at the front door, her face pale with shock. "I had no idea," she said through tears. "I never knew what he was doing." Detective Torres later explained that Frank had been systematically targeting new residents throughout Ohio, using his landscaping business as cover. He had developed an elaborate system of entering homes and stealing small items to fund gambling debts. "He chose your family because you were new," she told them. "He thought with a baby, you'd be too distracted to notice things going missing." The most chilling discovery came when they searched Frank's truck and found surveillance photos of Emma and notes about her schedule. "Your dog literally saved your daughter's life," Detective Torres said. "Frank was escalating, and there's no telling how far he might have gone." In the days that followed, the neighborhood transformation was remarkable. Mrs. Patterson arrived with an apology and homemade pie. Bob Kellerman organized a barbecue in Rex's honor. Dr. Wells examined Rex and praised his incredible restraint. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about Rex's heroism with the headline, "Guardian Angel, How One Dog's Loyalty Saved a Family." The most meaningful moment came when neighborhood children, accompanied by their parents, asked to play with Rex. Sarah watched as her dog, who had endured weeks of suspicion, patiently allowed small hands to stroke his fur. "He doesn't hold grudges," Michael observed. "After everything they put him through, he's just happy to be accepted." "That's what real loyalty looks like," Sarah replied. As autumn gave way to winter, the Thompson family settled into the peaceful life they had. Sought in Millbrook, Rex had returned to his relaxed demeanor, though his protective instincts remained sharp. On a snowy December evening, as Sarah sat by the fireplace with Emma and Rex at her feet, she reflected on their journey. "Rex never gave up on us," she told Michael. "Even when the world seemed against him, he kept protecting us." Michael looked down at Rex, whose tail thumped at his name. "Maybe that's what real family means, standing by each other no matter what." Outside, snow covered Millbrook in pristine white, symbolizing fresh beginnings. Inside, a baby played safely under the watchful eyes of parents who had learned to trust their instincts, and a dog whose devotion had proven that true loyalty needs no justification. Rex had shown them that being different didn't make him dangerous, and sometimes the greatest threats come from unexpected sources. In protecting the Thompson family, he had also protected an entire community from a predator who might have terrorized families for years. As evening settled into quiet, with Emma asleep and Rex taking his position outside her door, Sarah and Michael knew they had found more than a home in Millbrook. They had discovered the true meaning of community, perseverance, and unbreakable bonds that connect hearts across all boundaries. Dear listeners, we hope the story of the Thompson family and faithful Rex has touched your hearts and reminded you of the incredible bonds between humans and our four-legged companions. Rex's unwavering loyalty shows us that true love knows no boundaries, and sometimes the greatest heroes come in unexpected forms. If this tale of courage and redemption moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button to help us share more stories celebrating the extraordinary power of love and devotion. Leave a comment about your own experiences with loyal companions. Every day we bring unique stories exploring life's beautiful complexity and the relationships that define us. Don't miss our upcoming content where we'll continue exploring how love conquers fear, understanding defeats prejudice, and courage triumphs over adversity. Thank you for joining this emotional journey.